Now, Nigerians must prepare against impending devastating floods this year. That is the warning from the Nigerian Hydrological Service Agency. Director General of the agency, Clement Nze, says Nigeria's geographical location, which is downstream of all the countries in the River Niger Basin, places it at the receiving end of disastrous floods and pollution from all the countries upstream. The agency recommended that the 3 tiers of government should consider clearing of drainage systems and canals and also embark on projects for improving hydraulic conveyance of surface runoffs during peak flows. It called for the removal of refuse, weeds, water hyacinths and floats on water channels and on all avenues for river runoffs. Director of Programs, Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa, Philip Jakbo, joins me now to talk about this. Good morning, Philip. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Good morning.
This issue of persistent flooding is something we talk about. I remember we had a conversation about this last year.
Last year, yeah, exactly.
And we are talking about it again this year. What does it say about our level of preparation, on the one hand, government, and even as a people?
Well, I think it's good to establish the fact that NIMET and Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency, they're actually doing a good job. The implication is that, unlike before 2012, we now have agencies of government that can predict what is going to happen. They've been doing it very, very well. But where we seem to have a challenge is the state governments and then agencies like the National Emergency Management Agency doing something about this prediction. So that is where we have a real big problem.
Interagency collaboration.
Interagency collaboration, seriousness in response to the warnings that NIMET and the NHSA make every year. Like you rightly said, we discussed this last year, and here we are again. We seem not to have learned our lessons from the past. We seem to continue to do the same thing the same way, year in, year out. Now, if agencies like NEMA and their state counterparts are actually doing what they should do, and what are those things they should do? They are not too much. Now we hear that people along the banks of River Niger, and where you have these areas prone to flood, should evacuate. It is not good enough to hear things like that, because we always give examples of other climes where you have this kind of disasters happening, putting in place structures. I think last week or 2 weeks ago, there was something about, this is in the US, where you have the hurricane season. It's a yearly thing also, like we have here. Now, in 2020, when we had COVID, what the US government did was to go beyond just setting up shelters, but also providing shelters that are COVID-19 compliant. Now, year in, year out, what you have on their websites and the notices going to the public is what people in those flood-prone areas or hurricane-prone areas should have. Shelters are not even limited to building tents there. Hotels, they make arrangements with hotels to take in people who might likely be displaced for free or nearly free. So these are the kind of things we expect to be hearing now, not the regular floods are coming, move where? Exactly. Move and spread COVID-19 to other areas. These are the challenges we have. So it's synergy in government, and it's not there.
Now, talk to us about the level of engagement between you and perhaps these agencies, so making them understand that we need to move beyond just having this talk about move, but having proper preparation for the people to ensure their safety as well.
Well, I think what is bigger than what we are doing here, this is sensitization. This is making those agencies of government that should be responsible to hear what is going on, on ground. There's nothing bigger than what we are doing here.
But then there's also a level of interfacing with them, taking the conversation further.
Well, these discussions have been on for years. Like I mentioned, 2012 was, we had the disastrous It was a catastrophe. And I remember what we did as an organization was not only to visit those places, we documented those things and made sure it was in the public domain. Documents were put out there, and these documents targeted actions that should be taken. And they are very, very clear. Like I mentioned earlier, is it too much for states to build shelters? Not this ad hoc, is going to. Now we even have 3 months' notice.
Where we can prepare.
So we can prepare. Set up, places where people can shelter on high ground. 2012, like we mentioned earlier, is a disaster because what we saw, I was in Lokoja, for instance, and most of the places that were set up, you have close to 200 families in a school, and you have 2 or 3 toilets.
And we have COVID-19.
Now we have COVID-19. Do we even have anything in place? I think I was reading in one of the national dailies that some of the states don't even have any plan or budget for this kind of emergencies. Now, the Niger Basin countries where Nigeria fall into, we are very, very unfortunate because we are on the lower rung. So when you have these flood waters coming from Niger, Chad, and the rest of them, they have to empty into the Atlantic Ocean. So they have to pass through, Benue, Kogi, it just continues coming down. So we are actually at the epicenter of, this crisis. So whether we even have climate change impacts or not here, the fact that water is coming from those countries is going to pass through here. In 2012, there was this thing about, for instance, because I remember what happened then was that there was too much rain, and Lagdo Dam in Cameroon was, open, so waters can continue to flow. But dating back to like 1979 or 80 or so, when that dam was built, there was a clear message to the Nigerian government to build buffer dams, smaller dams, to assimilate waters that will, come from those areas. Till date, that has not happened. So what we do is just, it's going to happen, and we rush, clear the drains, and
measures.
They are not sustainable things. We just have to, take proactive steps, and that is what NIMET and the Nigeria Hydrological Service Agency want this NEMA and the state governments to do.
Perhaps we do not understand the implication of all of this. Maybe you could educate us, like you said earlier, they are listening. So maybe you educate people to understand that if we do not take measures now, it could be worse than what we think. Again,
what can be bigger than what we are doing here? This is supposed to be, we're talking about people we elected.
Educating about implications.
The implications are even beyond just the flood.
Yeah.
It's going to have adverse effects on agriculture. People are going to be displaced. We are going to have new illnesses. We are going to have even the COVID-19 we're talking about spread more because people will move to different places. So the implication is bigger than just, the flood is coming, people should evacuate. It's going to cause a lot of crisis. Children are in those places will stop going to school, their parents will move to, you are going to have those kind of crises. So it has this multiplier effect. And this is what you expect responsible governments to know and do something about.
But we have, some will say that we have community leaders, community communicators who wield some level of influence, who know these things, who feel the pulse of the people because they are closer to the people. They see what is happening. They understand what is going on as well. But what is their level? Perhaps they have a role to play at this point.
Sincerely, they do. But then, do we have agencies like the National Orientation Agency working with them? This is where they also come in. You see, what we are doing here, what you are doing here, we expect, those kind of public communication going on radio, television, newspapers, using the local languages, using the community leaders you are talking about. But it's not happening. So the blame goes back to government.
Now, let's look at the recommendations closely. Now, the agency is recommending that the government, the 3 tiers of government, should consider clearing of drainage systems and canals, also embark on projects of improving hydraulic conveyance of surface runoffs during peak flows. It also called for the removal of refuse, weeds, water hyacinths and flutes on water channels and on all avenues of river runoffs. Perhaps this is in the short term. Or how far will this go?
Ideally, it should not even be this agency of government
telling them what to
do. This should be statutory. Clearing of drains, opening the waterways. But again, the blame still goes back to government because the drains are blocked because you also have governments allocating lands to people in green areas and things like that. So it's unfortunate that we have to year in, year out say the same thing. And of course, if you have you have the responsible helmsmen or women of these agencies of government who understand these things. They talk about climate change like we talk about it.
Of course.
But concretely, are they doing anything? No. It's just hadockery, if there's any language like that. So it's very, very unfortunate. But we cannot stop talking. So that's why what you are doing is also very, very good. We must continue to talk.
Now, on the part of the people, how educated are they with regards to this issue, especially also with regards to refuse dumping and all of it, knowing its attendant impact on their own lives?
Well, there are laws. Are those laws being implemented, or are they being implemented in the breach? That's also another thing. So I think even if you educate people, there will always be people who go against the law. Once they are penalized, other people will learn. Once I know that if I build on a floodplain, my building will be destroyed. Nobody else will want to, buy lands there. There's indiscriminate allocation of lands, people buying lands just everywhere. You see it not only in Lagos, every part of the country. So if we have laws like I don't doubt we have,
you do,
and these laws are enforced, we see that those who breach these laws are penalized. I think people will do the right thing. But some level of education about what climate change is, environmental destruction, these things are ongoing. But it is the political will to do some good enforcement that is not there.
And that is the question again for some persons. Even though we have to flog the matter, is it so much of a challenge to wield or just, stir up this political will to address these issues? Because people are suffering. People are dying. We recorded hundreds of deaths last year, just last year.
Yes. Again, this brings us to the all-important issue of people in government being responsible, feel the pulse of the people. Some of these people live in, those areas, the posh areas that don't suffer some of this impact. How many of the people in government live along those floodplains? No, they don't. So they don't directly feel it. But if they do, they will do something about it. But it is our own collective responsibility, those of us who know, to continue to talk. And I think we must continue this enlightenment. We must continue this education. We must continue this sensitization and urge government agencies that should do this. The National Orientation Agency, NEMA, their state counterparts, SEMA, to be alive to their responsibility. For now, they are not, and it's at a high price.
At a high price. We must perhaps understand that price, because if nothing is done, what do you see happening?
Chaos, disaster. So the whole essence of NEMA, the Nigerian Meteorological Agency and NHSA making these warnings will be defeated if nothing is done about it. So the states must wake up. It is serious. I think to a large extent we have been very, very lucky that we've not had the kind of disaster we had in 2012. We had 21 out of the, not 21, about 25 or so out of the 36 states of the Federation was virtually underwater.
Yes.
So we've been lucky to a large extent. But how much that luck is going to, remain with us is another thing. The impact of climate change is there. The hurricane season in the U.S., I think the report 2 or 3 days back was that 2020 had the worst hurricanes. So they anticipate it's going to be worse this year.
This time.
So it's not going to be restricted to those places. These things, we are going to start feeling them. And how we have responded to the situation will go a long way to determine how our people will be safe. Because
we already have reports. When you talk about flooding, we already have reports about when it comes to food, there is a crisis.
Yes.
On the one hand, which reports have been going on because of the security challenges that we are facing. Farmers can't really go to the farms. And then we are now looking at a flood situation.
And a drought.
Oh, a drought as well.
So you have all these things coming together, and it's going to be crisis except we do something.
And then we also have a COVID-19, which is, it's more of a very complex issue that if we are not tackling it as they come, might really be a complex situation.
And get out of hand, yes.
Wow. And then talking about local governments, perhaps we need to understand their roles here. Now, they are closer to the people. If the federal government is not responding as such, what can the local governments do?
Well, there's this saying that government is local. So where you find yourself, that is your government. So if the roots in your community are in order, you feel it directly because that's where you live. And the local governments, to a large extent, are tied to the state governments. We know this challenge, it has been there for years. And so they are largely hampered. But if they were to function the way the local governments were set up to function, I think some of the things will look up to the federal government. You see, since we've been saying this, discussing this, I think my focus has been the states. Because NIMET and its sister agency, these are agencies at the federal level. They've been hammering. I don't think it is the federal government that will set up just shelters in Lagos. We've had cases in the past when we had those kind of floods, for instance, and you see state governments asking for funds from the federal government to be able to set up shelters for. It's shameful. These are some little things they can do. So if the local governments, like we said, actually living up to the expectation, that's functioning the way they were set up to, some of these things are at community level, because some of the areas that you have these floodplains are in different communities that these local governments could do something.
Yes.
But for now, they are hampered. They cannot do it.
Handicapped. There's nothing much they can do. So perhaps you mentioned earlier that we saw what states in the U.S., for instance, have done to addressing these issues. Perhaps there are lessons we can learn from them to adopt moving forward.
Clearly, once we have these warnings like we've had, I think we should have a plan, not an ad hoc plan, because with the issue of US that we mentioned, states like Florida and the rest of it, they have, plans that they build up on yearly. So I mentioned something about their plan. Last 2 years ago, they were not talking about COVID. They were talking about people being moved to shelters. Last year, they were talking about people being moved to shelters that are COVID-19 compliant. It's progression. So we have to start moving along that path. So, yes, we have talked about setting up shelters. We must also look at setting up shelters that are COVID-19 compliant. Hopefully, by the end of this year, we may have people who have been vaccinated and COVID goes away. But it doesn't detract the fact that we must also have plans, because this year is COVID. Next year could be something else. We don't pray for that. We must have these plans ongoing and not just, jumping hard hoc all the time.
Hopefully, government will look into all of this and ensure that we do not have to have this conversation on a yearly basis, build on plans already on the ground, and then we can progress moving forward. Director of Programs, Corporate Accountability and Public Participation, Africa, Philip Jakpo, thank you so much for your time
It's a
on the
pleasure.
program.
Thank you.